Tonight, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in the hot seat over border security.
Our immigration system, however, is fundamentally broken.
The latest on GOP efforts to oust him. Plus,
a roller coaster of emotion, mostly hellish.
Families of Israeli hostages beg for their release while negotiations between Israel and Hamas at a standstill. And
we have schools, orphanages, churches.
A mission to rescue orphans in Haiti. How Christians on the ground are working to get them out of a country in crisis. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Lawmakers grill DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas today on the crisis at the border. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Tara Mergener, in tonight for John and Jenna. Well, new threats of gridlock are delaying the impeachment trial of DH Secretary Mayorkas. House Speaker Mike Johnson's decision to hold off transferring articles to the Senate will give Republicans there more time to argue for a full trial. Senate Democrats hope to quickly dismiss the proceeding and move on to other business. Meanwhile, Mayorkas himself testified on Capitol Hill about the Homeland Security Department's budget for 2025. National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke has been following those hearings and joins us now. Caitlin.
Tara, this department's mission is securing the country from the many threats facing Americans. While the 2025 budget seeks investments in areas like cybersecurity and resilience to natural disasters, today's appropriations hearing focused mainly on money requested for border security.
This budget is not only full of gimmicks that mask the true cost of protecting the homeland, but it also fails to address the policy-driven crisis that continues at the border.
Republicans used the hearing as an opportunity to grill Secretary Mayorkas over what they call failed policies and an open border.
You and the Biden administration over the past few years have reversed the secure policies that were working. You stopped the border wall construction, expanded parole, allowed for millions of individuals, as we've heard, including known and suspected terrorists, cartel members, unforgivable levels of fentanyl and illicit drugs and substances into our country. Yet again, you sit before this committee and ask for out-of-touch priorities again and refuse to take accountability for the total failure that you have allowed for at the southern border.
Mayorkas defended his record and the agency, pointing a finger back at Congress for basically ignoring a bipartisan bill designed to fix an immigration system he labels as fundamentally broken.
The bipartisan bill that a group of senators worked on, I had the privilege of being seated with them, would have delivered a consequence regime like no other. It would have been the first time since 1996 that our broken system would have delivered the much-needed fixes that we need to fully enforce the law.
Some key issues flagged by Republicans in the proposed budget include a cut in funding from last year despite a surge in migrant encounters, a request for fewer detention beds than the previous year, and money for only 350 new Border Patrol agents. The secretary pointed out that due to congressional delays, he submitted the 2025 budget request before they passed funding for 2024, timing which hindered him from predicting more accurate figures.
At every stage of the apprehension, removal process, and everything in between, that we would need resources. More Border Patrol agents, more support personnel so we can ensure that those Border Patrol agents are out in the field doing the enforcement work that they signed up and for which they are so skilled to perform. More asylum officers, more immigration and customs enforcement personnel, more detention capacity.
Secretary Mayorkas also faced questions about President Biden possibly issuing an executive order shutting down the southern border by the end of the month, an action long considered the nuclear option.
We are consistently evaluating what options are available to us. That executive action, which is inevitably challenged in the courts, is no substitute for enduring solution, if I may, for the enduring solution of legislation that will fix what everyone agrees is a broken immigration system.
Next week, Mayorkas is scheduled to testify before the House Homeland Security Committee, facing many of the lawmakers issuing the loudest calls for his impeachment. Tara?
Caitlin, thank you. Well, turning now to the race for the White House, President Biden is losing favor with Latino voters while support is growing for Donald Trump. When President Biden took office in 2021, he had a 29-point lead over Trump among these Latino voters, and now it has fallen to just a 9-point lead. Analysts say frustrations over inflation and crime are responsible for this trend, but while the Biden brand isn't resonating with Latinos, the numbers show they still prefer Democratic policies on key issues like abortion and immigration. For more on this, Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, joins us now. Reverend, 20 points is a huge drop. So what is behind U.S. Latinos steadily souring on President Biden and warning up to Trump?
The only way to basically frame the response is via the conduit of a set of queries. Here it is. How many Latinos do you know believe in late-term abortion? These are the policies of the Democratic Party, the current Democratic Party. How many Latinos support open borders and fentanyl and cartels taking over the inner cities and even suburbs for that matter? How many Latinos believe that government has the power to take away your children and mutilate them at their discretion if your child self-identifies with a sex other than that he or she was born biologically with? Simply stated, Latinos do not support the ultra-left progressive ideological worldview espoused by the current Democratic Party. Hence, the bleeding, which will impact, by the way, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Georgia.
Well, let's talk about the border crisis as well, because that's on the top of mind for most voters, Latinos included, ahead of November. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson says the Biden administration is allowing it to happen because Democrats want it for political gain. Let's listen.
I think they want that open border, and I think their actions show that.
Why? Why do you think they want it specifically?
It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I think it's actually true that the ultimate design is to turn some of these illegals into voters for their cause and to change the census outcome in 2030. Because if you can distribute people around the country in strategic ways and put them in strategic places, the census does not just count citizens, it counts residents, all persons. And that could dramatically affect the map in Congress. I mean, it sounds like some sort of crazy, criminal design, and in my view it is, but I think that's what they're doing.
Reverend, do you agree that this crisis is intentional on the part of Biden and the Democrats?
I've been working on this since 2006 with the Bush administration, then with Obama for 8 years, and then with Trump for 4 years, even negotiating between the Trump White House and Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the wall, on the border wall, in exchange for dreamers. Simply stated, the answer is yes. It's not conspiracy theory. The idea is 1986. That's the hope. What does that mean? Amnesty. The idea is if they permit 8, 10, 15, 20 million illegal entries, inevitably there will be blanket amnesty in the same way that Ronald Reagan rendered that amnesty in the late 1980s, and they will become U.S. citizens who will vote primarily for the Democratic Party, even though I have great qualms about that, as you can tell. They're leaving the Democratic Party, or better yet, abandoning Joe Biden. And those that are registering Democrats, by the way, they believe it's the old Democratic Party of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. And Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. So yes, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's about voters, voters, voters. By the way, I find that to be morally reprehensible. Ironically enough, I was there yesterday, Eagle Pass, Texas, and I looked at just clothing and underwear and the residue of humanity attempting to cross over the Rio Grande in such a way where children died, individuals died in that river because of egregious malfeasance for political gain. I find that to be reprehensible.
And very quickly, the impact of illegal immigration on the Hispanic community. We have just seconds left. But, I think the assumption is that Hispanics and Latinos, they support illegal immigration, perhaps. Maybe they sympathize. But, what is your thought quickly on that?
No. Listen, cartels, fentanyl, drugs, violence, there's an increase. Not every single illegal immigrant is a bad person. They're all created in the image of God, without a doubt. But there is an incredible infusion of increase regarding violence and crime. So no, Latinos are not in favor of open borders. We are in favor of legal immigration.
A lot to see here coming up before the election. Reverend Rodriguez, thank you so much for your thoughts as always.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, former President Trump weighs in on the abortion debate again, this time saying he would not sign a federal abortion ban if he is reelected in November. While fundraising in Atlanta today, he blasted Arizona's Supreme Court for upholding a Civil War-era law that bans most abortions in the state.
Did Arizona go too far? Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly.
And this is Donald Trump's clearest stance yet on what could be a deciding factor in this election. To the American economy now, inflation is still running higher than the Fed wants. Today's Consumer Price Index report shows inflation up 0.4% in March. That is higher than expected. The year-over-year rate is running at a 3.5% increase, also higher than anticipated. Analysts believe as a result, the Federal Reserve will move more slowly to cut interest rates. E.J. Antoni is a research fellow in the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. He joins us now for more. Now, first, welcome. You gave us your initial thoughts on the higher than expected numbers in March. What are you thinking about that?
I'm thinking that there is no indication we are going anywhere near 2% anytime soon, because we continue to see these multi-trillion-dollar deficits out of the Treasury, which are essentially being financed by money created out of thin air. And so as long as that continues, we are not going to see inflation down to 2%, much less go away.
And, you know, a lot of people are trying to manage their budgets now, of course, right? So for those trying to figure this all out, what you're saying, no time soon, but when might there be a turnaround, and when could inflation possibly come down at this point?
Unless you get a change in policy, unless you remove the factors that are causing the inflation, you're simply not going to get rid of the inflation. So what's causing it? It's simply the government spending too much money, because the government also controls our currency. And that's a deadly combination. We've seen that over the last several years. It's a lesson that we learned very painfully in the late 70s and early 80s, and we are relearning that lesson 40 years later.
Obviously, you know, again, the economy is a big issue for voters, right? Usually is. Now, when the president campaigning with the message of economic success, Joe Biden, you know, is that message resonating, you know, when it comes from him at this point with most Americans?
I don't think so. Most Americans don't buy the data. They know that their lives are far worse than what the news headlines proclaim. And I think a couple of very good examples of that would be the jobs reports, which clearly show one story, and Americans' lives tell a completely different story, but also these inflation reports. Just one quick example, if you look at the component of the Consumer Price Index that is supposed to measure the cost of home ownership, it's up about 20% over the last 3 years, which is pretty bad. But in reality, in other words, if you use real world data to compute the exact same thing, you get an increase between 80 and 100%. In other words, the official government metric is off by a factor of 4 to 5. That's terrible.
Right. And finally, you know, we can't really say for sure, but sticky inflation, obviously. Do you have any quick predictions as we go forward? That might be some hope even.
You know, and August came early to Washington, D.C. This is hot and sticky, like the weather we're supposed to have in a few months. It is a hot print and it is sticky. There's no indication that these rates are going substantially lower anytime soon. We are stuck at 3% or higher for the foreseeable future.
Right. Well, EJ, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see. We'll hope for the best. Well, coming up, the desperate fight to bring Israeli hostages home, the latest on the war in Gaza, and more just 2 minutes away. Welcome back. Hamas is rejecting a new U.S. plan for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages. Instead, the terror group is going back to its original demand for a permanent end to the war and the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Strip. It is another devastating blow to hostage families who were at the White House yesterday seeking answers.
There are 133 cherished souls who are being held there, and it is time. We don't want any more progress. We want results.
Back in Gaza, Palestinian families returned to utter destruction. The IDF pulled out of the area over the weekend ahead of a major planned offensive in Rafah. Today, the Israeli military dealing a personal blow to Hamas's leader. Palestinian media says an Israeli airstrike in Gaza killed 3 of his sons. It is not known how their deaths will affect the ceasefire talks. While some hostage families are meeting with U.S. leaders this week in Israel, many are also working to see their loved ones free. George Thomas has more from Tel Aviv.
I thought it would be easier after 6 months of interviewing, but it's not.
Since October 7th, Liran Berman has traveled virtually non-stop to tell his story, carrying around his neck a simple message: bring them home.
You describe what the last 6 months has been like for you, sir.
A roller coaster of emotion, mostly hellish. We have no good days, we have okay moments.
Berman's twin brothers, Gali and Ziv, among more than 130 hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. He and others like him are pleading with Qatari leaders to pressure the terror group to release the hostages.
Because we know that they are the key player that can facilitate a deal, and we saw that they facilitate the first deal.
As the war grinds on, these families grow increasingly desperate, with no resolution in sight for their loved ones.
My life, it stopped in 7 October, and all I'm doing is just fight for her.
Among them, Simona Steinbrecher, whose daughter Doran was captured on October 7th from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. In January, Hamas released a video of Doran and 2 other Israeli hostages. Thousands of Israelis are taking their fight to the streets, calling on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to strike a deal to free the captives. Meanwhile, at the Shifahim Hotel, just north of Tel Aviv, hundreds of survivors from Kibbutz Kfar Aza still find themselves in limbo 6 months after Hamas changed their world.
It's about almost 7 p.m. here at Hotel Shifahim. It's an unusual scene because you have members of the Jewish community right behind me who are saying their evening prayers.
In the last 6 months, this hotel has been converted for members of the Kfar Aza kibbutz. About 400 people today call this place their home. Mobile homes are set up next to the hotel to accommodate more families. 52 residents of Kibbutz Kfar Aza died October 7th, including Karen Flasher's parents, who still struggles from the nightmare of that day.
They're not coming back, and there's nothing I can do and no one that can help me bring them back. So for me, supposedly, I can start healing, but it's not possible, because this is not just me.
Recently, these kibbutz residents confronted a Swiss Red Cross delegation visiting the hotel, demanding to know why the aid agency isn't doing more to exert diplomatic pressure on Hamas.
And if the authorities, whoever they are, state actors, non-state actors, don't give the Red Cross access, yes, then you cannot help. It's basic as that.
An Israeli team returned from Cairo after negotiations with Hamas to release the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. So far, both sides remain far apart. George Thomas, CBN News, Tel Aviv.
Haiti, ripped apart by violence. How one ministry is working to save orphans from the bloodshed. Welcome back. Haiti's humanitarian crisis is getting worse as weeks of gang violence brings the nation to its knees. Gunfire echoes daily in the capital of Port-au-Prince, where residents are running out of basic supplies and medication. The violence has driven more than 17,000 people from their homes in the capital. Others with nowhere to go shelter wherever they can escape that gunfire. In the meantime, rescue groups are still struggling to evacuate Americans trapped in the Caribbean nation. Thousands of orphans are among those stranded in Haiti, and although the U.S. Embassy is closed, one ministry is up and running, working to help bring kids to America safely. CBN's Jenna Browder reports on this uphill battle.
Turmoil in Haiti.
The capital city of Port-au-Prince reeling from gang warfare, with life for locals growing more dangerous by the day. Among the most vulnerable, Haiti's orphans. Love Him, Love Them is one ministry on the ground trying to help.
We have 6 different locations. We have schools, orphanages, churches. We opened a hospital in the middle of a global pandemic. And it's unbelievable. We're responsible for over 5,000 children.
Founder Linda Gunter says they have dozens of children ready to come to the U.S.
We have 101 children who have already been matched. They have adoptive families here in the United States. The families here in the U.S. already know the kids already know the families, and yet we can't get them out. We can't get them out.
The problem is paperwork.
We have paid, played by the rules, for lack of a better term, done everything exactly the way we're supposed to do, and yet we can't get that final piece of paper to get out. Why can't we get it? They closed the embassy. So we can't get into the embassy to get that final stamp.
She's asking anyone who will to sign a petition with the National Council for Adoption. And if you want to take it even a step further, you can write to the U.S. State Department and your congressman here in Washington. The goal is to get the government's attention and persuade it to take action on behalf of these children.
We just need to make some noise. We need to make some noise.
Jenna Browder, CBN News.
All right, coming up, a baker's lost diamond has her customers chewing a little more softly. Next on Faith Nation. And finally, tonight, a Kansas bakery says there could be a $4,000 diamond ring in one of their cookies, at least the diamond part. Dawn Monroe from Sis Sweets Cookies and Cafe lost a solitaire diamond from her wedding ring. It fell out on Friday, sometime between rolling the dough and baking all those cookies. Staff narrowed the search to chocolate chip, sugar, or peanut butter, asking customers to keep an eye out and use caution before biting into one of them. So far, the Facebook plea for the diamond's safe return has nearly 300 shares and counting. And by the way, that ring has been on her finger for 36 years. So hopefully she gets it back. That is going to do it for Faith Nation. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.